I always start by saying, don't clap yet, I may suck. And so I was a little late in that one. The first thing I want to do is disavow you of the fact that these letters after my name mean absolutely anything at all. So I'll give you three choices at the beginning. Choice one is that I'm completely overcompensating. Choice, I used to drive a Hummer. Choice two is that I'm a kind of a lifelong learner and have a intense desire and curiosity to learn. And choice three is that I'm really just kind of impatient and like to learn a lot of new things all the time. So those are your three choices. But instead of just giving to them, I'm going to prove them to you that they mean absolutely nothing. So these are my report cards from second grade and fourth grade. And as you can see, although I've improved, if you look at my writing score in fourth grader, I got an F. So I did not improve all that much. And I carried this tradition of academic excellence all the way through high school. So again, let me disavow you of the fact that those letters mean anything. But if you still need more proof, I was traveling about a month ago, and I'm generally pretty organized. But I got back to my desk, and I saw a note on my desk that I had jury duty the very next day. I thought, oh crap, I'm working in the emergency department. So I get online, and I put in all this information, and I'm about to hit submit. Oh, wait a minute. There's a little area that said, are you in law enforcement? And I checked yes, but I said, well, I'm not really in law enforcement. I help out on the Phoenix SWAT team occasionally, but I'm not really in law enforcement. So I changed that answer, redid the whole thing, hit submit button, and a few seconds later, I got this note. So hopefully now the bar has been set incredibly low. So what I get to do today is I get to practice emergency medicine, which if I could say I was born to do anything, it would be to practice emergency medicine. I would do it most days for free. Some days you couldn't pay me enough to do it. And the thing I love most about it is that there are certain times when you're the only person that can help somebody incredibly disenfranchised. And so you're often helping people at the very worst moment of their life. And I love that responsibility. I also get to fly a lot, so I get to combine passions with professions, and I get to fly around to do different things, which has been absolutely a blast. So now let me tell you what I believe in. So that was me, and that's probably still true to this day. I have not grown up. All right, so here's what I believe in. And wow, is that high. I believe that when we ask about a singular career path, we stifle our capacity for innovation and creativity, that on your deathbed you should be thinking, holy, whatever, what a ride, and not if only. I believe the most rewarding life is one punctuated by failure and mistakes. And finally, I believe that the more diversity in thought and action you have, the more tolerant you become of others. And with that tolerance comes love, connection, and happiness. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. When I was 5 years old back in Illinois, well, I was actually 5 years old everywhere I went. It was almost this weird phenomenon. But when I was 5 years old back in Illinois, my parents used to say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I wanted to be a dog. This was our dog, Bozo, and Bozo bit everybody in our family and most of the kids in the neighborhood, but he never bit me. And I think he realized that we were very similar. But when my parents said, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a dog. They said, well, you need to study harder. To this day, they are still telling me that when I talk to them on the phone. It wasn't for a few years that I looked at this book by Time Life. It's called The Physician. And I probably couldn't really even read it or understand it. But I went through it a lot, and I realized at that moment I wanted to be a physician. Now, this will strike you as odd when I tell you the next story. My intersection with healthcare up until that point had not been positive. For example, my mom took me to our GP one day, and out of nowhere, out of the blue, she said, you know, Dr. Giannetti, John touches himself down there too much. My mom outed me, and I thought to myself, well, at least I'm not a dog, imagine what I'd be doing. But without missing a beat, Dr. Giannetti said to me, if you touch it again, I'll cut it off. And so I was 7 years old, and I haven't touched it since. So flash forward 50 years, I'm 55, and Dr. Croman, I think you said it best, I have made every mistake in the book, some of them twice. Business, flying, law, medicine, I have made them all. And I will tell you that I've not worked a day in my life. I've had an absolute blast. And if someone said, how hard do you work? I'd say, I don't work at all. Some people will tell you that I seem to do everything, and I think I've had this most remarkable experience that one could possibly imagine. But now let's go through a few things that I believe. I believe that when we ask about a singular career path, we really stifle kids or ourselves creativity and innovation. So let me give you a quick example of this. So who's read the book Blink in here? Malcolm Gladwell wrote it. It's a pretty cool book. And in this book, he talked about this study that was done in the Journal of Surgery. And in this study, they looked at 200 surgeons. 100 of them had been sued more than twice. 100 of them had never been sued. And they recorded the informed consent discussion that those surgeons had with their patients, and they washed out the voices. And they gave it to a bunch of undergraduate students who listened to this talk, and they were able to pick out with remarkable accuracy which surgeons had been sued based upon the tone of their voice. That was the only thing they used. And they thought it was some form of being condescending is what the students recognized. And so I read this in Blink, looked the study up in surgery, and at the time, I was just finished law school, and at the time I knew there was a real malpractice crisis in the US. Physicians were moving out of communities and out of states that had bad malpractice records and going elsewhere. And so this was a real crisis. And I also knew, just from my background, that women physicians were sued a lot less than men. And the theory was that women are more compassionate, more empathetic, and better communicators. And I think that's probably completely true. But I thought, well, that's interesting. Is there a business model here? So I thought, just had a background of law and business and a little medicine. I thought, gosh, maybe there is a business model. But it's kind of unfair because, what if you're a dude who practices medicine like a woman? That's empathetic, compassionate, and very caring. So I thought, what if there's a test we could give? So I partnered up with two psychologists here at ASU. They wrote a test. We gave it to a lot of physicians, a lot of male physicians, and then scored it. And sure enough, the people who scored the highest had the best malpractice record. In other words, they hadn't been sued. So we took that knowledge and turned it into a business called MSTAR. And today we've given this test to hundreds of male physicians that when they score well on it, their malpractice rates are decreased, and they save quite a bit of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to date. So my point in saying all this is that, but for this intersection of these different experiences I've had or education I've had, I never would have come up with this idea. If you look through the course of human history, most of the greatest discoveries have been not necessarily in the field of the person that was trained or educated. They were outside the field, but they applied one set of knowledge and looked at it through another set of lenses. And that's why I so love education, because every time I educate myself somehow, or I am educated, it's like putting on a new set of lenses. And that, for me, has been, no pun intended, completely eye-opening. Okay, this is my favorite. I was really fortunate as an emergency physician to notice this early on, and I've noticed it a few times. Unfortunately, sometimes I see people at the worst moment of their life, and sometimes it's right before they die. And for some of these people, they have this look on their face, and I started calling it the if-only look. And I may be completely imagining this, but I don't think so. I thought, it's this wistful look, and I was imagining what they were thinking. If only I had loved more deeply, cared more, tried harder, whatever, fill in the adjective you want. But I swore on my deathbed I was not going to have the if-only look. I was going to be yelling this all the way to heaven or wherever I'm going to go. Because what worries me the most is this. Well, let me back up a little bit. This means, that does not worry me the most. That is not my ass. This means whatever you want it to mean. It doesn't mean you need to go out and buy a squirrel suit and jump off a cliff or go spearfishing for great whites. It just means that life is relatively short in manner of speaking, and it could be much shorter than we expected. Depending on what you believe, you'll only go around once. So why not simply go for it? So hence the squirrel suit and the spearfishing. Because this is what I fear the most. That I'm lying on my deathbed and the person I've become meets the person I could have become and just gets a crap beat out of him by that person. I don't want that to happen to me. So I thought, okay, what can I do? How can I continually evolve? How can I continually progress so this person, these people never meet? Or when they do meet, it's like, hey, I'm looking in the mirror at myself. So I kind of come up with this plan to think about these 5 and 10 year time frames. So, and I'll give you a quick example. So about 10 years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to be, there'll be some point in emergency medicine where I'm going to be like, okay, what else is there to do in life? I thought, maybe I want to fly for one of the major airlines. And how do I go about doing that? This is an actual airline. How do I go about doing that? Imagine their overhead announcements. Anyway, well, to do this, you need a 737 type rating. To do that, to get that, you need an airline transport pilot rating, and a commercial rating, and a multi-engine rating, and all the way back down. And it takes about 5 years and a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money. But I knew that at some point in my early 50s that I may actually want to fly, probably not for this airline, because I could never say that over the loudspeaker without laughing, but maybe for Southwest, which would be a lot easier. So I started on this path of checking these boxes off. And that works well for 5 and 10 years. But what do you do for 1 year? So this is what I do every year. I put down all the things I'm involved in, put down all the things I'm trying to accomplish in that year, and then I spend about 20 minutes a day on each one of the tasks that I have down in this thing. So, or each one of the subject matter, so textbook for urgent cares, I spend about 20 minutes a day. And 20 minutes goes by really fast. It's not all that hard. And at the end of the week, I start checking off the boxes. And you'd be surprised how quickly you move the ball forward or how quickly you evolve. And you can do this for all sorts of things. And I'm almost embarrassed. I didn't really look at what was on this thing, so I can only imagine how to change the slide quick. But when I went back and looked at this a little bit, I thought, holy cow, I did a lot in 2014. But it's just forward, small progression, step by step, that allows you to evolve on a day-to-day basis. So on your deathbed, you are saying, what a ride, and not if only. So, third, I believe the most rewarding life is one punctuated by failure. Because without that, you never really know your capacities. You have not leaned into your discomfort. This sounds really weird, but I grew up failing. I mean, those are my report cards. You got that. I was a mediocre student at best. I was a mediocre athlete. I once threw a discus into a crowd of Ethiopian runners, which would have been the prequel to Black Hawk Down back in the early 80s. It's true. And so failing for me became not all that scary because I did it so often. But what I learned is if you wanted to quit failing, you had to kind of change your perspective. You had to have the ability to laugh at yourself. You had to have the ability to look at old problems new ways. And once you got over this fear of failure, man, life just opened up because now it allows you to be creative and screw around and have you be the butt of your own jokes because what does it matter? You got to be pretty good at failing. I used to own a bunch of hot dog stands. And I was getting an MBA here. And I would go to school during the day, and then I'd work all night at Tempe St. Luke's in the emergency department. So one morning, Saturday morning, I'm driving home, and the woman who ran the hot dog stands called me up and said, John, I can't make it there. I'm not feeling well. I go, boy. So I go pick up the hot dog stand, drive to Home Depot. It's really busy. And so Saturday at Home Depot, there's like 20 people around me, and I'm bleary-eyed tired. And I see this guy staring at me. Now, if you grow up Catholic and you're a young man, if some dude's staring at you, the first thing that pops in your head is what? Your zipper's down. So I check it. I'm like, nope, I got that going for me. So this guy finally walks over and says, I think I know you. And I said, I don't think so. He goes, no, I think I do. And he goes, and I go, I'm thinking, how do you know me? And he goes, you sewed up my foot in Tempe St. Luke's last week. And I go, okay. And he goes, and you left some glass in it. And everybody around me looks at me like this, and they're all kind of back up. I said, and that's why I'm selling hot dogs here today. So it sounds dumb, but I learned a lot about supply chain from owning hot dog stands. A number of years ago, I started in the urgent care business, failed repeatedly, triple mortgaged the home, but finally it was kind of a success, and it really grew up to about 60 urgent care centers, brought in private equity, and 2 years later, I was unceremoniously fired by the group that I brought in. But for it, who's laughing at that? So about the same time, I thought, a lot of these patients we see, I don't need to touch them. Sometimes I don't want to touch them, but I don't need to touch them. I wonder, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this virtually? So literally the next week, virtual medicine, at least the way I practiced it, was born, and we started a company called MeMD. And but for that failure, NextCare, and the failure was I brought in the wrong group, candidly. But for that failure, it never would have happened. So for every failure I've had, it's hard to even call them failures because they've always led to a time that was better than the last. And then here's one of my favorite quotes by Shay Agassi, Israeli entrepreneur. If you're not willing to fail, you certainly won't succeed. And finally, I believe that the more diversity in thought and action, the more tolerant you become of others. And with that tolerance comes connection. So I'll give you a quick story. I was working in the emergency department the other day. Poor kid comes in, and he's drunk. He's very disheveled, and he lives on the street. And I introduce myself, and I say, how is it I have the pleasure of helping you today? And he said he was trying to kill himself. And I said, what could be so bad that you were trying to kill yourself? He tells me this very, very sad story about growing up in Seattle. He tells his parents he's gay when he's an early teen, and they sent him away. I said, let me guess, pray the gay away. He goes, yup. And he goes, but they tried to beat the gay away, and that didn't work. And here I am today, 10 years later. And as I was talking to him, I literally became friends with him. We shared a pizza together, and I really hit it off with him. But if you saw him on the street, you would easily discount him, or I would easily discount him as well. But I can't tell you how many times I've taken care of a patient that on the surface looks like somebody who you would just walk by. But when you get to know their story, you have this Atticus Finch moment where he's talking to the scout. You never really know a person until you see things from their point of view, until you put around their shoes or crawl into their skin and walk around for a while. So for me, education and diversity has led to much more tolerance and acceptance than I ever thought I had the capacity to do, because you realize that we're all pretty much the same, but for circumstances. And if I was this poor guy, Jeff, I would be drinking every day as well, as opposed to as a way to escape reality. So now, instead of asking myself and asking others what they want to be when they grow up, I ask them how they want to impact the world and how they want to leave the world a better place than the one in which they're born into. So with that, I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Mark Twain. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, discover your, put the winds in your sails, and explore, dream, and discover. Thank you.